Hello, Misfits, and welcome. In this episode, I want to talk all about my process of world building. And I'm not gonna lie, when I thought about how I would make a video on this, I had the hardest time trying to sit down and sort of formulate what I do into like a list that's easy to follow. This was so difficult for me to sit down and think about my process, but it was so good for me to sit down and kind of think about what exactly I do. And I realized that, yeah, there are things that I follow. I'm a very structured person, so of course there would be some sort of like list that I try to check off as I go through. But I thought this would be super useful. Some of my friends and some of you guys have asked for it, so here it is. And as with any advice, this is what works for me, this is what I do. It might not be what works for you, but regardless, hopefully it is helpful in some way to you. All right, so number one, the first thing we need to do is figure out the scale on which we are building. So I say world building, but you might not be building an entire world. You might be focused on a continent or a country or a city. Regardless of the scale, all of these tips are going to be helpful. All of this is going to be used. It's just going to adjust sort of like, well, yeah, the scale, like the size, the amount of things that you're kind of looking at. So number one, figure out your scale. When I was building my first homebrew world, I literally decided to build a world, which was probably like the worst thing I could have done just because it was a lot to do, but that's what I did. And I stuck with it, and I did the following things that I'm going to cover, and it was super helpful. And then I sort of revisited that for campaign 2. Even though it's set in the same world, it's sort of a new place, so I needed to revisit these things once more. So pick your scale. All right. Number 2, you need to create groups of races and people. Okay? These groups are going to end up being your countries or your cities or your organizations, whatever scale you're working on, you need to create these groups of races. I think it's easiest to start with that because it's going to help you answer the next questions a little easier. So when I was creating Aurelia, I decided to split it into 2 big continents and then sort of like a neutral zone in the middle. And I kind of assigned like races to different places. Like we've got, you know, our good aligned races in Amarine, and so we've got our elves and our dwarves and our gnomes and all of them in there. And then we've got our more evil aligned races typically. So our tieflings, our orcs, our minotaurs, goblins. And then I put the majority of like the in-betweens, the pupils, the half-elves, those sort of neutral things in the middle and kind of spreading towards those continents. So that sort of helped me separate things, and it helped me answer the next sort of questions here. Kind of tacking onto that though, as you are grouping up these races or collections of races, I then will typically assign sort of like a name for that country or city or organization. And I use that fantasy name generator website. I use that like religiously. If I don't take the name directly from that website, I will probably take parts of it or use it as inspiration. So, and again, once you've picked your races, now you're like, all right, well, I need a country that is ruled by orcs. So you can kind of like look at the orc names and look at maybe the kinds of cultures that the orcs would they be more of a tribe, or are your orcs in your world a more industrial city, and kind of look for like industrial names for that place or more like village names for that place. You can kind of use those races to help you pick those names, if that makes sense. All right, number 3, I typically try to then decide how wealthy or poor that group, that country, city, whatever it is. And again, I will think back on maybe how I think the different sort of races fare in my world, and might use that to sort of inform that decision. If you're in a world where elves are the bottom of the rung, then maybe an elvish country would be more impoverished. Or if you're in a world where minotaurs are in charge, then maybe the minotaur country or city would be very wealthy. Just think of things like that. And I'd encourage you to probably break the molds of, the stereotypical race alignment just to keep things interesting, but that's what I do personally and enjoy, but to each their own. Number 4, it's at this point that I will try to assign a form of government to this collection of people, this group. And again, I will look back at how I think that group functions within the world and how wealthy or poor they are to kind of help decide what that form of government would be. If I've got a really sort of traditional, relying on expectations, very wealthy kind of group of dwarves, then maybe they are used to a monarchy and having like a king passed down through a lineage. If I have a collection of a bunch of different types of races with vastly different cultures that don't get along super often, I typically would have trouble picturing them all backing one king that was born into that role. I might instead give them an elected official or a consulting council that rules them. So I will sort of look at things that way. And so once I've made all those prior decisions, then I assign the form of government and try to make it sort of make sense in my mind and within the context of the story and the world that we are building up. All right, and then number 5, the sort of last thing I do for these different countries or groups is I'm going to assign sort of popular religions for the area. Once you've picked your races and your government and all of that stuff, that's really going to help you pick those religions. Because there are certain, races where they will worship a very specific god. I mean, if you're doing a drow nation, you might want to incorporate Lolth in there. Or, there are some orc gods and goddesses that you might want to choose if you're doing sort of an orc, half-orc sort of country. So keep that in mind. You don't have to stick to that, of course, but just bear that in mind. Also, if you've decided that a country is bad and there are some not nice people in there, you might want to pick some more evil-aligned gods to be worshipped there. Whereas, your good nation might have your more stereotypical lawful good, neutral good gods and goddesses. So keep all of that in mind. We're always using those past decisions to sort of help us figure out the next steps and to try and make everything cohesive, if that makes sense. So that is breaking down just sort of how to create one group, one country or continent or whatever. But you can then do that over and over and over again until you have fleshed out multiple places. And of course, on the smaller scale, you can do that for your towns and cities, and then you can take it up to a larger scale and do it for your countries and then your continents. And then, of course, at the broadest level, your world. So I find those things super useful. And then once you have done all those broad things, we can sort of now look at more specifics. So, the following points that I'm going to hit are things that I do not do until I absolutely 100% know that the party is going to go there, all right? You do not want to put in a ton of work fleshing out a location that the party never goes to, okay? If you've done all this broad stuff that we just talked about, then you have enough information just off of that alone to be able to answer general questions about a place if it comes up in conversation. But all of these other details I'm gonna start to go into, this is more specific. This is like, we're gonna go there, we're gonna learn more about this place firsthand and see these things. So I really would not hit these next points unless you know they're gonna go there, or unless the place is maybe really important to the backstory of a character. Things like that. So bear that in mind. So the first point, what is this country's relationship to other countries? You need to consider their wealth, you need to consider the religions they practice, you need to consider whether the people that live there are good or evil or somewhere in between. You need to use all of that past information we just went over to help you decide how this city, country, whatever, interacts with the other groups of the world. If you have a country of evil, industrial drow worshipping Lolth, they might not get along super great with the sort of woodland gnomes that are worshipping the Wild Mother in their little happy village place. I don't know, just an example. Just keep that in mind. Things that are very different, places that are very different with very different cultures and ideologies probably don't get along super well unless there is something that one has that the other needs. So keep all of those things in mind as you're building out these relationships. The next thing that I think about is, what is this place famous for? What is fueling their economy? What helps them get by? When people think of this location, what do they think of? If you are building out a sort of coastal town, they might be famous for building ships, and that is the thing they're famous for. So they have a vast port, and everybody sort of travels in and out of that place when they are sailing and stuff like that. Or, every ship you come across is from that location. If you have a place that is really only known for foraging or hunting, they might be a more impoverished place. They might not be super famous, but they are the best at that specific thing. They are the best hunters. And so the game that is hunted from those people, they always shoot through the eyes and they never damage the meat or the hide when they're hunting. I don't know. Think of those little specific things. This is what they are famous for. And remember, are they a wealthy place or a poor place? If they are a really poor place, they're probably not going to be famous for their expert jewelry craft, And if they're a really, really wealthy place, they're probably not going to be famous for, the one log mill in town. They're going to be famous for something a little bit more grand that brings in more money. So just keep all of those past decisions in mind as we move through these. All right, and then the next one is, what are some of the biggest problems that this place, this country might be facing, and how do they deal with it? This can be really anything. This can be sort of political turmoil. This could deal with money. This could be a sort of a clashing of religious views. It can be anything. But what is their biggest problem that they face, and how do they deal with it? You might have a country that is a collection of several different races. and they all are very, very different. So their biggest issue might just be trying to get along. And so you got to figure out how they deal with that. Maybe they deal with that by having each sort of subgroup or culture have a person with a seat on a council so that everybody is heard. Maybe they deal with that by practicing religious freedom. Maybe they deal with that by having a big culture festival. Things like that. Or maybe you have a place where their biggest issue is they lack metal or something. They lack a special ore, and so they don't really have access to that. How do they deal with that? Maybe they set up a trade route with a dwarvish country that has what they need, the sort of metal ore that they need, and they've established some sort of trade route. Or maybe this is a sinister sort of poor country, so they deal with that issue by stealing what they need. So they have a crime syndicate that goes and steals this precious ore from neighboring countries, and maybe that's how they get ahead. Things like that. Just those sort of I don't know. And anytime I have a chance to sort of turn something on its head and make it kind of quirky, I will try to. But that is probably one of the last things that I think about. And then you can sort of, I guess, go smaller. If they're gonna visit there specifically, that's when maybe I'll come up with a series of shop names and places and make sure that I hit the basics, But those are my general things that I hit. So we sort of hit those specifics after tackling the broader category, and that's essentially my process of world building. It's a lot, and it's something that I think you get better with practice. The more you do it, the better you get. And, you can sort of come up with a bunch of different ideas, and maybe you don't use them all, but you can use them later down the road. There's certainly places that, in my mind, I had fleshed them out for my old campaign, and they never went there. So I'm just going to take a lot of that material and use it in this new campaign if I can. If they don't ever get there and experience it, is it canon? Probably not. You can just use it again later. Things like that. It takes a lot of work to flesh out a world and a place, and so try to make sure that stuff doesn't go to waste. If you spend a lot of time on a place that doesn't really get explored, don't feel like all of that was for nothing. You can still use it again later, and sort of let them experience that, even if it maybe isn't the initial way that you thought. Well, as with anything, I really hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope it was useful to you in some way. If you like this content, if you've enjoyed this video, if you found any of it helpful, please feel free to like and subscribe. Please throw a comment below. Tell me about some of the places that you have created, or tell me about other things that you want me to talk about in the future in some of these videos. And other than that, I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you again next time. Legitimately, this video was so difficult to make. There is so much that I could talk about in terms of world building, but I didn't want to overwhelm anybody or sound like I was crazy, because I really do think I am the person that's at the board and the red string is connected everywhere, and I just have this crazy look in my eye. That is me. Because when I'm building this stuff out and creating this stuff, it I don't know how to stop. It just keeps happening. It keeps, I don't know. It's crazy. And I would not recommend starting with a whole world when you're building a homebrew campaign. That's like the worst way to start, because like you're biting off way more than you can chew. It's like super overwhelming, very time consuming. Don't do it. Take it from someone who has been there and recognizes the mistake. Don't do it. Don't do it. Ugh. But I hope this video like made sense and was organized or seemed organized. Maybe? I don't know. You can let me know in the comments below. I wish I had a funnier bit for the end. Instead, I'm just, being nervous and frantic, which I'm pretty good at. So, anyway, take care, guys. Have a good day.